No slides, thank you for having me here. So I'm talking about the Fountain of Youth, which to an anti-aging conference should pique everyone's attention. And of course it goes without saying that in order to do anything positive for preventing disease or treating disease or anti-aging or rejuvenation, one needs to have an accurate and clear description of how a human being is organized and formed. Now, luckily, over the last 2 or 3 centuries, due to governments and major institutions and academic centers, we now have a very clear and concise and I would say well-researched conception of the human cell, which is one of the major building blocks of the human organism. If you compile that research and that understanding in a very succinct form, what we now know is that the human cell, or literally any cell in a biological system, is fundamentally a membrane-bound sac of water. And in that sac of water is contained the nucleus, which contains the DNA, which houses genes. And the cell has a charge, and that charge is important because an uncharged cell is a cell that can't do work. So all cells have a negative halo of charge around them. And this charge comes about because of the function of the sodium-potassium pump embedded in the membrane, which pumps sodium out of the cell and pumps potassium into the cell. And that differentiation of ions creates this charge and the ability of the cell to do work. We know that each gene codes for one protein. And finally, we know that the energy to run this whole system is contained in the high phosphate molecules of a chemical called ATP. And that, in a nutshell, is the foundation of modern science and medicine. A membrane-bound bag of water that has pumps in the membranes, that is run by ATP as the energy source. It contains genes in the nucleus that code for single proteins. The only problem with that is basically everything I just said is fundamentally incorrect. Fundamentally, unequivocally incorrect. The foundation of modern biology is, in my opinion, fundamentally misguided. Now, the first time I had real serious inkling of the problem here was when I spent my first, I've been in practice now as a medical doctor for about 35 years. Pretty much always as a holistic, nutrition-minded doctor. But for the first 10 years, I moonlighted to make money as an emergency room doctor in a big city hospital. And over that 10 years, I saw literally scores, hundreds, maybe thousands of people who were at various times shot or crushed or bayoneted or knifed or somehow injured or mangled. And you know how many times in that 10 years I saw a squirt of water come out of somebody? 0. You know how many times I saw a puddle of water on the floor next to a crushed, bayoneted, or shot patients? 0. And it started me to ask if the fundamental assumption about the cell is that it's a membrane-bound sac of saline, which contains liquid water. And by the way, one of the other fundamental truths of biology is that matter exists in 3 and only 3 states. So there's solid, liquid, and gas. With water, it's ice, water, and steam. We know that 70% of the contents of the cell are water. You can prove that. 99.9% of the molecules in a human being or in a cell are water. You can prove that. And yet, there is no ice, no water, and no steam in the cell. 100%, anybody who just thinks about it a little bit or pokes holes in cells, no, nothing comes out. So that led me on a 30-year search to find out what is happening, and what I discovered is that there was a previously unrecognized fourth stage of water. Some people call it structured water or exclusion zone water or other names for this water. But basically all the cells, all living cells, all biological systems are based on the formation of crystalline water in the cell. It forms a kind of matrix which is formed basically exactly the same way as Jello is formed. And then think of it, everybody knows Jello. Jello is not ice, it's not water, you can stick a pin in it, nothing comes out. It's not steam, it's a gel phase, previously unrecognized. The importance of this gel phase is that this sodium-potassium pump, of which at least 4 Nobel Prizes in science and medicine have been awarded for its elucidation and understanding, has only at best a trivial role in this, in excluding sodium and collecting potassium. The way I know that is there are very precise studies showing that in order to run the sodium-potassium pump, it would take 30 times the energy that's available to the cell in total. That is an impossible situation. The reality is, the reason potassium collects in the cell is because the water forms a mesh, like imagine a screen on your windows to keep out mosquitoes. Because of the size of the unique mesh that water forms in the cell, due to the interaction of the water and the proteins in the cell. And by the way, the role of the ATP has nothing to do with energy, no matter what anybody will tell you. It has only to do with unfolding the proteins in the cell so that they become the nidus, the matrix basis for this crystalline gel formation of water. This crystalline mesh collects the potassium. The sodium is too big, so it excludes the sodium out of the cell, thereby creating a charge, thereby creating an electromagnetic field in the whole body. This mesh organizes the DNA so that it can make at least 200 proteins from a single gene, all based on the ability of this watery mesh to organize and shape the DNA to whatever it wants. The water mesh is the controlling influence of this. Now, because of that, it would seem like those of us who are interested in health and medicine and anti-aging and rejuvenation should spend at least some time trying to understand the nature of water. We all know water, H2O. And if the water in your cells is pure H2O, you form a living crystalline gel, which amongst other things functions as a perfect radio receiver. But if your gel starts to disintegrate, and instead of being a nice mesh, it's like a mesh or a screen on your house that has too big of holes, and of course it doesn't work, and the mosquitoes come in, at least if you live in New Hampshire like I used to do. And this mesh can't collect the potassium, it can't exclude the sodium, it can't create the proteins that it wants from the DNA. So we start to say there are mutations forming, which is mostly nonsense. What's happening is the ability of the water to structure the DNA as it wants is lost because the very mesh gel framework of the water in the cells is starting to disintegrate. And by the way, that is exactly what's picked up on an MRI. It measures the density of the water in the cells. When that starts to change, in other words, it's getting too hardened or becoming too liquid like water, then you see a difference in the integrity of the cell and the density of the cell, and we identify that as disease. So I said another thing, water is H2O, we all know that. It turns out, though, there is an isotope, which is a variation of hydrogen, called deuterium, which has an extra neutron. So it's twice as heavy as hydrogen, but because it's an isotope of hydrogen, it too can form into water, and that's called deuterium-rich, or otherwise known as heavy water. And deuterium-rich water, heavy water, has a completely different ability to do a lot of things, including the freezing point is different. But in particular, because it has a different configuration, it produces what I like to scientifically call a goofy mesh. The goofy mesh doesn't function properly. You end up getting errors in mitochondrial function. You get errors in the charge around the cell. The cell doesn't have a charge, therefore the cells start to clump together because they're not repelled from each other. And you get errors in DNA transcription and translation. As we age, the deuterium increases in the cell, and you end up with, as an older person, deuterium-rich environment, and it's like your radio is out of tune and all you get is static. There is a way out of this, which is very interesting, and of course we always have to prove these things with case studies and doing studies and other information. You can embark on a strategy of getting the deuterium out of your cells, out of the water, because the deuterium that we have in our bodies comes from basically two sources. One, drinking every single water there is out there, with very, very few exceptions, is 150 parts per million of deuterium. And the other thing is deuterium cannot be incorporated into fats or vegetables, but it easily gets incorporated into carbohydrates. So the way to get deuterium-rich cells, deuterium-rich water, is to eat a high carbohydrate diet and drink ordinary water, or truth be told, distilled water or reverse osmosis water, or any common water has high levels of deuterium in it. There is the possibility, though, of not doing that and eating basically a high-fat, high-vegetable diet and drinking water which the deuterium has been removed. Normal water has about 150 parts per million. Deuterium-depleted water can go down as low as 25. The theory of this, and of course all theories need to be proven, is this is the fundamental thing that happens as you age, as you accumulate deuterium in the cell, and this gel-like crystalline mesh that does everything from control our charges and allow us to be receptive to the spiritual world, quite frankly, although I don't know if I want to prove that in the next 1 minute. All this can be treated by adopting a high-fat, high-carbohydrate, deuterium-depleted water program. And there's been at least 2 cases of major studies done where all they did with the people with stage 4 prostate cancer was switch their water for 4 months from normal, whatever kind of water you have, to 25 parts per million. You drink 4 bottles a day. After 4 months, the situation was better, and these people, stage 4 prostate cancer people, lived 4 to 6 times as long as the control group. An unprecedented finding for stage 4 cancer patients. Another study that was done was with breast cancer patients who lived significantly longer with no other change in their regimen but drinking deuterium-depleted water. And the stage 1 breast cancer patients had the exact same lifespan as the normal controls if they drank deuterium-depleted water. Again, that's an unprecedented kind of result in normal oncology. To finish, I said I was going to tell you what the fountain of youth is. So there's this idea throughout human history that water is life and water is everything. And so there's a fountain of youth that if you can partake of it, you will have, I Yes, unlimited life and health. And while I've never seen the fountain of youth, my guess is the water was deuterium depleted. Thank you very much. It's been a wonderful audience.